Welcome to the Broken Bayonets channel, where imagination is the weapon and every detail is a deliberate lie. You stand on the edge of a French forest, the scent of damp earth and pine needles sharp in the cool air of 1944. The sounds of a 1,000-man armored division are thundering around you. The heavy rumble of M4 Sherman tanks, the grinding squeal of tracked vehicles, the constant chorus of engines warming up for the fight. But you don't hear the clang of steel on steel. You hear the deliberate rush of air from a portable compressor. You don't smell diesel exhaust. You catch the faint, industrial odor of vulcanized rubber and fresh paint. You are marching not with the vanguard of the Allied forces, but with the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, better known decades later as the Ghost Army. Have you ever wondered if the past is really the past, or if the most profound moments of history were in fact an elaborate, beautifully painted deception? You are part of an elite unit, a collection of artists, sound technicians, engineers and scriptwriters, a group of men whose average IQ historians would later calculate was an astonishing 119, a full 10 points higher than the rest of the army. This isn't a fighting force, it's a traveling, tactical illusion. Your mission is not to kill, but to convince the enemy that a massive army is present where only a handful of men exist. This creative legacy, the art of painting deception into reality, is your daily bread. You see the world as a stage, and the enemy intelligence officers are your unwitting, most critical audience. The genesis of this deception unit is found in the simple, brutal reality of the D-Day landings. The Allies understood that victory would not solely be achieved by superior force, but by superior misdirection. The Germans, anticipating the invasion, had to be fooled about the when and the where. But the Ghost Army's role, born out of the success of earlier, simpler deceptions like Operation Fortitude, would be even more daring, to create a mobile, flexible, and utterly convincing phantom army that could appear, disappear, and redeploy faster than any real division. Imagine the artist's studio that is your command post. You are surrounded by the raw materials of your trade, 40-pound inflatable rubber tanks that look like M4 Shermans when viewed from a scouting plane 10,000 feet up, stacks of canvas and wood frame artillery pieces, and miles of wiring for the gargantuan sound equipment. You are a scenic designer on the grandest, most perilous stage in human history. The level of detail you must achieve is meticulous, requiring not just artistic skill, but a deep understanding of military doctrine. An important historical figure in this operation, or rather, the phantom figure you are working to protect, is often General George S. Patton, Jr. While Patton's Third Army is moving with lightning speed toward the actual front lines, your job is to create a diversionary Fifth Army nearby, anchoring the German defenses in the wrong place. You must mimic the traffic patterns, the divisional insignia, which you paint onto authentic jeeps and trucks, the radio chatter, and even the personalities of the command staff. It is a terrifying responsibility, for if the enemy sees through your canvas and rubber props, the real troops, the steel troops, will be vulnerable. This is a surprising, little-known historical fact. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops never fired a shot in anger as a unit, yet they are credited with saving thousands of lives. They are the only U.S. Army unit comprised mostly of artists and creatives that participated in World War II combat zones, staging over 20 major battlefield deceptions in France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany. You are painting history, not merely observing it. Every brushstroke on a fake divisional patch, every precisely laid track mark from a jeep dragging a chain to simulate tank tracks is an act of war. It's an act of sheer audacity. Think for a moment about the controversial or mysterious point here. Historians are still debating the full, specific impact of every single Ghost Army maneuver. Did a single deception save 500 lives, or was it 5,000? The unit's top-secret status meant its full effect was obscured for decades, and the men themselves, the great painters, sculptors, set designers, and fashion illustrators among them, carried this secret, this beautiful lie in silence for 50 years. You are part of a legend that by design could not be confirmed until long after the echoes of the last shell faded. It is a quiet wonder to be so vital, yet so invisible. You walk past a pair of men inflating a life-sized B-24 bomber decoy. The fabric is thin, the illusion ephemeral. You can practically poke a hole in the fuselage with a stick, yet, when observed from above, under the right lighting, with the correct ground crew moving around it, it is a magnificent, threatening warplane. Not exactly a deep-fake video, but the Ghost Army's radio spoof has a similarly creepy effect on intelligence gathering. You overhear a technician discussing the precise frequency and the Morse code operator's unique fist he must mimic to fool the German interceptors. The enemy must believe they are monitoring a genuine massive formation. It is the creative legacy of men like fashion designer Bill Blass and painter Ellsworth Kelly that turns the horror of the front line into a surrealist stage play. They are the masters of illusion, the architects of a shadow army. Their tools are not the M1 Garand or the bazooka. Their tools are the air compressor, the shortwave radio, the paintbrush, and the boundless courage to stand in harm's way, armed only with a canvas and a lie. You realize with a slight smile that your greatest weapon is not metal, but the enemy's own imagination. Your purpose is not to defeat them physically, but to misdirect their minds. Like the meticulous detail of a stage, the Ghost Army's illusions are elaborately built layer by layer. You step away from the scent of vulcanized rubber and into the command truck of the 603rd Engineer Camouflage Battalion, the heart of your deception. This is where stagecraft and sound merge to become a terrifyingly effective symphony of fakes. The illusion, you realize, is a layered cake of sensory inputs, each designed to confirm the deception the others started. If the enemy's aerial reconnaissance sees a division, their radio interceptors must hear a division, and their ground patrols must see the associated activity and smell the required logistics. Your creative legacy hinges on this multimedia approach. The physical deception, the sight of the inflatable tanks and trucks, is the foundation. You watch as a small team can rapidly deploy dozens of M4 Sherman tank decoys. These aren't crude balloons. They are carefully sculpted, painted with tactical numbering, and weighted to sit correctly on the ground. From the air, the perspective is everything. You learn to paint the subtle shadows underneath a tank's chassis to give it the necessary weight and dimension, transforming a flimsy bladder of air into 30 tons of intimidating steel. The men, many of them painters from New York's School of Fine Arts or students of modernism, apply their knowledge of light and shadow to the landscape itself, turning a field into a convincing staging area. But the most astonishing and perhaps creepiest element is the sonic warfare. You move to the signal company, where the true engineering marvels reside. This is where the sounds of an army are recorded, amplified, and broadcast over vast distances using powerful, custom-built sound systems. An important historical figure in this unique field is Colonel Hilton S. Rayleigh, who spearheaded the project to build these massive mobile speakers. Imagine a recording studio on wheels, its tape reels filled not with music, but with the authentic, terrifying sounds of war. The low growl of tank engines idling, the sharp crack of artillery moving into position, the shouted commands of NCOs, and the general, chaotic din of a massive staging operation. The sonic deception is a surgical, psychological operation. You aren't just playing noise, you are orchestrating a symphony of fakes. You must play the sounds in sequence, the rumble of a column moving into position, the sounds of bivouac being established, the mechanics working on engines, and then the quiet of a division settling in for the night. The sound engineers, many of whom came from the nascent American film industry with experience in Foley artistry and movie sound production, had to master the acoustics of the battlefield. They understood that sound travels differently depending on the time of day, the weather, and the terrain. They calculated the precise decibel level and frequency required to make a single truckload of speakers sound like an entire armored division deploying 3 miles away. It is this scientific rigor applied to art that defines the unit. You realize the surprising, little-known historical fact that the Ghost Army's sonic equipment was so powerful and advanced for its time that it could project the illusion of movement. By moving the massive speakers in a carefully choreographed way, they could make the sound of a tank column appear to travel across the enemy's listening posts. Not exactly a deep-fake video, but the Ghost Army's radio spoof has a similarly creepy effect on intelligence gathering. It's an oral mirage, fooling the enemy's most sensitive listeners into believing they could pinpoint the division's location, only to find the army had melted away by morning. The sound alone was often enough to freeze enemy movements or convince them to commit reserves to a phantom threat. There is also a controversial or mysterious point tied to the radio deception. While the visual and sonic deceptions have been widely recognized, the signal company's radio spoofing was arguably the most dangerous and delicate component. The operators, many of them skilled radio actors and former hams, had to transmit authentic-sounding traffic. They mimicked the Morse code fist, the unique rhythm and cadence of a real operator of the divisions they impersonated. If they were too precise, the enemy might suspect a deception. If they were too sloppy, the enemy would instantly dismiss the traffic as fake. Historians still debate how often the German intelligence services were completely fooled by the radio traffic versus simply being confused by the sheer volume and ambiguity of the transmissions. The best deception is often not a clean lie, but a torrent of believable, conflicting information that paralyzes the target's ability to act. You realize with a slight smile that the truth is often less effective than the right kind of lie. You are participating in the creation of phantom logistics. The men in the camouflage battalion are masters of trompe-l'œil, the art of deceiving the eye. They don't just paint tanks, they lay down simulated track marks using customized jeeps dragging timber and chains. They create the appropriate litter and debris of an encampment. Mess halls, command tents, latrine pits, all the mundane details that lend reality to the grand facade. Like the meticulous detail of a stage, the Ghost Army's illusions are elaborately built layer by layer. The job is not just to fool a pilot miles in the air, but to fool a prowling German forward observer who might be only a few hundred yards away, armed with binoculars and a lifetime of military experience. The commitment to this realism is absolute. You see one of your fellow soldiers carefully applying dust and dirt to the freshly painted rubber canvas of a tank to make it look authentically road-worn. This is the creative legacy of men who understood that the devil and salvation is in the details. The true arsenal of the Ghost Army is not steel, but the human mind, and the canvas of war is your domain. You are surrounded by the men who comprise the heart of this deception, a concentration of creative talent unparalleled in any other unit of the war. Your command post, hidden deep beneath the camouflage nets, functions less like a military headquarters and more like a fevered artist's studio. Here, the skills typically reserved for New York galleries, Hollywood backlots, and high-fashion houses are weaponized, turned into instruments of battlefield misdirection. You walk among the key figures, recognizing the diverse skills that paint deception into reality. There's the fine artist, focused on the trompe-l'œil of distance and perspective, ensuring the painted shadows on an inflatable tank are precisely right for the low afternoon sun. Then there's the graphic designer, tasked with the flawless reproduction of divisional insignia, creating authentic-looking unit patches and markings that must stand up to scrutiny from both aerial photos and captured documents. You watch a man who before the war designed window displays on Fifth Avenue, meticulously arranging the disposable refuse of a fake encampment, cigarette butts, K-ration wrappers, and oil cans to suggest a hurried, legitimate staging. One important historical figure to emerge from this unit is the abstract expressionist painter Ellsworth Kelly. Before his canvases sold for millions, he was here, applying his sophisticated understanding of form, color, and perception to camouflage netting and rubber decoys. Kelly and others like him understood that the task was not merely to hide, but to convince. Their art was the creation of a negative space, the absence of the real army in the place where the enemy thought they saw it. You realize with quiet wonder that these men are using the principles of modern art, abstraction, minimalism, and perspective manipulation to save lives on a terrifying scale. The unit's makeup presents a surprising little-known historical fact. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops included men who would later become titans in their respective fields, from the fashion icon Bill Blass, who brought a keen eye for detail and staging, to photographer Art Kane and sculptor Richard Poussette Dart. They brought a unique, highly valued civilian expertise to a military problem. The military's task was to put steel on the ground. Yours was to put a psychological construct in the enemy's mind. Their creative legacy is not just in the art they made after the war, but in the elaborate, invisible canvas of lies they constructed during it. The most controversial or mysterious point tied to the Ghost Army is the nature of the intelligence gathering itself. Did the Allies overestimate the unit's effect, or did they simply classify the details so effectively that the full scope remains hidden? Some historians suggest that the Germans were not merely fooled by the fake tanks and sound, they were strategically overwhelmed by the volume of information. The Ghost Army's presence forced German intelligence to divert precious resources, reconnaissance flights, radio intercept operators, and counterintelligence agents to chase phantoms. The unit wasn't just convincing the enemy of something fake, it was tying up the enemy's cognitive bandwidth. This is the subtle beauty of the deception. The cost of chasing the illusion became greater than the cost of a real engagement. You watch as the scriptwriters, many of them former radio playwrights, craft the believable narratives for the radio transmissions. They write about supply problems, troop morale, and false operational objectives, all designed to sound exactly like the daily chatter of a real army. Not exactly a deep-fake video, but the Ghost Army's radio spoof has a similarly creepy effect on intelligence gathering. The actors in the signal company are performing a play where the stage is the whole of Europe and the audience is the enemy high command. You realize with a slight smile that this is guerrilla theater taken to its absolute, most deadly extreme. Your job now is to secure the perimeter of a fake command post. You set up the appropriate number of guards, drive the correct number of jeeps, and wear the right new divisional patches. Like the meticulous detail of a stage, the Ghost Army's illusions. You move now from the logistics of creation to the psychological battlefield, recognizing that the true target of your sophisticated arsenal of deception is not a physical location, but the mind of the enemy intelligence officer. Your unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, is engaged in a daily, high-stakes game of convincing highly trained professionals that a lie is, in fact, an undeniable reality. This is the central tenet of your creative legacy, the art of making the enemy commit resources based on a phantom. The goal is to induce paralysis by analysis. You flood their intelligence network through aerial reconnaissance reports, intercepted radio traffic, and biased local informants, with compelling, consistent data that points toward the presence of a powerful, threatening Allied force. The pressure of wartime intelligence means they cannot afford to ignore the sheer weight of evidence you provide, even if parts of it feel slightly off. An important historical figure in understanding this psychological warfare is General Omar Bradley, who championed the idea of operational deception on the Western Front. While Patton relied on speed and steel, Bradley understood that misinformation was a force multiplier. Your unit's operations were never arbitrary. They were meticulously timed and placed to support Bradley's broader strategy, creating flanks that didn't exist or suggesting attacks in areas the real army was deliberately avoiding. You watch your commanding officers studying maps, treating the enemy's likely thought process like a problem in advanced geometry. Every inflatable tank is a calculated variable in an equation designed to solve the problem of massing real forces elsewhere. You realize a surprising, little-known historical fact. Your unit was not only fooling the German intelligence officers, but also, occasionally, the American troops who were not privy to the top-secret mission. Stories abound of real combat soldiers encountering the Ghost Army's staged encampments, complete with convincing divisional markings, sound effects, and men milling about, and reporting back to their commands about the massive division they had just seen. This accidental confirmation from unimpeachable sources added a final, powerful layer of authenticity to the deception. You are creating a reality so complete that it even fools your own side. This commitment to the lie is both necessary. The controversial or mysterious point surrounding this aspect is the degree to which German counterintelligence was fractured or decentralized enough to fall for these repeated deceptions. Were they truly incompetent, or was the Ghost Army simply that good? Historians suggest that Hitler's insistence on defending every foot of territory, combined with the Allies' total air superiority, meaning the Germans couldn't verify visual sightings without great risk, made the deceptions almost guaranteed to succeed. The enemy was predisposed to believe the worst-case scenario, and your unit expertly provided it. The psychological victory lies not just in the illusion, but in knowing and exploiting the cognitive biases of your target. You stand by the sonic truck as the enormous speakers begin to emit the familiar, heavy roar of a motorized column moving at night. It's a terrifying, visceral sound, and you imagine the German patrol shivering in a cold foxhole miles away, listening to the seemingly undeniable proof that a massive armored force is maneuvering just over the ridge. Not exactly a deepfake video, but the Ghost Army's radio spoof has a similarly creepy effect on intelligence gathering, sowing doubt and wasting enemy time. Like the meticulous detail of a stage, the Ghost Army's illusions are elaborately built, layer by layer. The Ghost Army's illusions are elaborately built, layer by layer. The scripts for the radio traffic are deliberately kept simple, focusing on mundane, believable details, the kind of chatter that suggests a genuine, operational unit that feels secure enough to be slightly careless with its communications. Your creative legacy is rooted in this understanding of human nature under pressure. The enemy is more likely to believe a lie that is 90% real and 10% plausible fiction than one that is entirely fabricated. You are painting deception into reality by adding the perfect amount of human dust and noise to the magnificent, hollow props. The culmination of your creative legacy, the ultimate test of the artist's studio, arrives in the crucial crossing of the Rhine River. This is the zenith of deception, a grand operation where the stakes are astronomically high, and the success of the entire Allied push into Germany hinges on your ability to paint a believable lie. The operation is codenamed Operation Viersen, part of the larger Operation Plunder, and its goal is to convince the German High Command that General Patton's Third Army is preparing to cross the Rhine far south of the actual crossing points chosen by the 9th and 1st US Armies. You are fully engaged in the execution, surrounded by the chill of a camouflaged forest along the riverbank. This is the most dangerous assignment your unit will undertake, placing you perilously close to the German forward observers and artillery positions. You are tasked with creating a fully operational, division-sized illusion of staging a phantom beachhead. You must establish a front where none exists, drawing fire and German reserves away from the real attack. An important historical figure involved in the actual crossing is Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery, whose 9th and 1st US Armies are the actual spearhead. Your job is to make the Germans believe the threat is coming from an entirely different sector, securing the successful passage of the real troops. For several days leading up to the crossing, you work non-stop, deploying nearly 600 rubber tanks, artillery pieces, and vehicles in plain sight. They are inflated, positioned, and camouflaged with a painter's precision, creating the unmistakable signature of a massive armored division ready to attack. This scenario brings to light a surprising, little-known historical fact. In the lead-up to the Rhine crossing, your unit created 4 distinct, sequential deceptions in a period of just 10 days, jumping from one location to another, mimicking different divisional patches and radio chatter. This rapid-fire repositioning, dubbed double bluffing, was essential. The enemy would spot one concentration of forces, commit resources, and then, before they could investigate fully, you would appear to redeploy miles away, confusing their overall picture of the Allied advance. The German intelligence was so confident in the Ghost Army's The controversial or mysterious point here is that during Operation Viersen, the Ghost Army came under direct German artillery fire for the first time. The deception was so convincing that the enemy committed real ordnance to destroy your imaginary forces. You hear the deep, chilling roar of shells exploding near your position, striking the ground just a few hundred yards from a cluster of inflatable Sherman tanks. You realize the surreal terror of being shot at for a lie you painted. Historians still debate the casualty count among your unit. While minimal compared to combat divisions, the fact that artists and radio operators were targeted by heavy artillery underscores the deadly seriousness with which the Germans regarded your deception. You remember the unit motto, "We only got hit when we did a good job." You are moving among the sonic projectors, directing their beam across the Rhine. The sounds are deafening locally. The noise of landing craft being launched, engines revving, and the chaos of an assault being prepared. Not exactly a deep-fake video, but the Ghost Army's radio spoof has a similarly creepy effect on intelligence gathering. The sound is timed to coincide with the movements of genuine American engineers setting up dummy boats and simulated smoke screens. It is a coordinated performance, a theatrical feint played out with lethal intensity. Like the meticulous detail of a stage, the Ghost Army's illusions are elaborately built layer by layer. The precision is terrifying. You see the fashion illustrator applying mud splatters to a Jeep's windshield to suggest recent hard driving. You see the sculptor adjusting the canvas of an artillery piece to mimic the exact angle of elevation used by the division you are imitating. Every decision, from the choice of radio slang to the arrangement of empty cigarette packs, is a calculated attempt to misdirect the enemy's gaze from the real crossings happening miles to the north. Your creative legacy reaches its terrifying peak here, proving that a canvas and an air pump can be as powerful as a cannon. Following the success of the Rhine crossing, your unit, the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, begins to fade back into the shadows, performing smaller, tactical deceptions until the final days of the war. But the most enduring part of your story, the final chapter of your creative legacy, is the unseen hand that guided history for decades, the lasting silence enforced upon the Ghost Army. You are part of a secret that the US Army deemed too valuable to ever reveal. This sophisticated doctrine of tactical deception, this blueprint for fooling an enemy with art and acoustics, was considered a potential weapon for any future conflict. Your mission was not merely top secret, it was classified for over 50 years, rendering the entire existence and incredible contribution of the Ghost Army a historical mystery to the public. You return home, a veteran who cannot speak of the most significant, life-saving work you performed. The canvases you painted, the sounds you projected, the lies you told, they all vanish into a bureaucratic void. An important historical figure in maintaining this secrecy was the Joint Chiefs of Staff who signed off on the initial classification order. They understood that the mere knowledge of the Ghost Army's capabilities could compromise future operations. Imagine the irony. You used your artistic talent to save thousands of lives, only to be forced to live with the silence, watching as other units received accolades and historical recognition, the actions that your Phantom Army helped make possible. This enforced silence is a core part of your creative legacy. The men who painted history were forced to accept the fate of being historically invisible. The surprising, little-known historical fact is that many of the artists and designers who returned went on to achieve fame in the post-war world, but their wartime contribution was never discussed. Ellsworth Kelly could talk about cubism, but not camouflage. Bill Blass could design a new collection, but not the inflatable tanks he helped deploy. The public and art critics alike were unaware that the creative genius they celebrated had been honed on the battlefield, transforming rubber into Sherman tanks. The true art was the one that remained unseen and unacknowledged. You realize this forced omission is the ultimate act of performance art, a collective. This leads to the controversial or mysterious point about the Ghost Army. Its full impact on the war may still be understated. Because the records were sealed and the men were instructed never to speak, the information necessary for a comprehensive historical analysis was unavailable for decades. When the mission was finally declassified in 1996, many of the veterans had passed away, taking the nuanced details of their operations, the precise German reactions, the small-scale deceptions, the close calls, with them. Historians are still debating the full extent of the 23rd's successful misdirections and whether the official credited number of lives saved, 15,000 to 30,000, is a conservative estimate. The legacy is a mystery wrapped in a classified file, its true depth perhaps forever unknowable. You reflect on the instruments of your unique unit. Not exactly a deep-fake video, but the Ghost Army's radio spoof has a similarly creepy effect on intelligence gathering. It was the fusion of technology and artistry, a concept so far ahead of its time that it took half a century for the world to catch up. Your work proved that a few hundred creatives, armed with canvas, paint, air compressors, and tape recorders, could effectively tie down 2 German divisions, creating the illusion of a full-scale army. Like the meticulous detail of a stage, the Ghost Army's illusions were elaborately built layer by layer. The ultimate beauty of the creative legacy lies in the fact that it was successful precisely because it was an artistic endeavor. The military mind seeks logic and mass. The creative mind seeks to exploit perception and expectation. You and your comrades used your understanding of light, sound, narrative, and human psychology to paint a deception into reality, a masterpiece of military misdirection that quietly altered the course of the war. You stood in the breach, armed with an air pump and a brush, and your courage was silent, your victory invisible, until the final curtain was drawn 5 decades later. The quiet settles back into the world, the echoes of the phantom engines and the rustle of canvas fading into the vast, echoing library of history. You pull back from the candlelit map, allowing the details of the inflatable Shermans and the perfectly broadcast